Welcome back to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sara Payne. Is it just me, or does it feel like the pace of marketing has significantly accelerated in recent years? We're creating more content, we're supporting more channels, responding to more requests, and somehow every project is urgent. AI has certainly accelerated that trend, but I don't think AI created it. It simply lowered the friction to creating content, which changed expectations almost overnight. Today's marketing leaders aren't just expected to produce great work, they're expected to produce great work immediately. As content becomes easier to create, the hardest part may be knowing what deserves our time, our creativity, and our urgency. That's the topic that I want to focus on today. What happens when the speed of marketing starts to outpace the speed of thinking? To help us unpack that question, I'm joined by Scott Brinker. Through his Chief MarTech platform, he's spent more than 18 years analyzing how technology is reshaping marketing. He's the best-selling author of Hacking Marketing, co-author of The New Automation Mindset, and was dubbed the Godfather of MarTech by Ad Age. Scott, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here with you, Sara.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you. You've got just an amazing background and perspective on this. So thanks so much for joining me today. Scott, what do you think is happening? Does marketing actually move faster today, or does it just feel faster?
I kind of feel like it's my fault. That's not entirely like my fault, but like collectively, the marketing technology space, I think, is to blame for this acceleration, and in a variety of ways. I think you're right to say that AI is certainly contributing to it, but it's not where it began. Pretty much ever since we moved into this like digital era, of marketing, a couple things happened. First of all, on the audience side, on the consumer side, this sort of explosion of touch points, the immediacy of having so many of these interactions happen through digital channels. There was just a demand and an acceleration on that side. And then on the other side, technologists, entrepreneurs started coming up with all these, great and innovative marketing technologies, to help marketers be able to produce more, faster, serve it, engage it, which again, a lot of upside to that. But I think I'm so excited for this discussion because, there's a cost to that. There's a cost that I don't think we typically calculate, which is okay, you can accelerate these engines and the technology can keep up. Question is, can we keep up from an actual mental thought perspective of do we really have our hands on the wheel?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that because that's exactly where I was going to go next in the conversation is what is the cost of operating at this pace? Because I believe there are several.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, I think the biggest is, there are several. The one that comes most immediately to mind, though, is this reduction in time to think, to reflect. Marketing at its core is such an art as much as a science. It's really trying to put yourself in the shoes of your customer, your audience, understand them, really be able to think about how does your brand engage with them, and this isn't something that we can get from quick glances at ever-changing dashboards and Excel spreadsheets. It requires a certain almost anthropological, commitment to really understanding and thinking through this. And when you squeeze that time out, just because you can get machines that will spit out answers to you doesn't actually mean we internalize that.
I totally agree with you on that. I mean, there's also plenty of science that suggests that giving things time to, there's the anthropological piece of this. There's also the, setting something, working on a body of work for a period of time, setting it aside and coming back to it, whether that's taking a walk around the block, right? And giving your brain that sort of ability to have other stimulus and then coming back to it, right? How you can see something from a different perspective. And are we shortcutting that process? Right? Whether it's from a strategic perspective or from a creative perspective, if we are moving at this pace.
Yeah. There was a great book by the economist, I believe his name Daniel Kahneman, called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, about this idea of
Yes,
having two
yes.
systems of thinking, one that's a very reactive, immediate thing, and the other that's more reflective, and I kind of feel like there's some parallels to that, in marketing. It's great that we have so many of these digital systems that have that sort of thinking fast, like that, immediacy ability to react in the moment and move at the speed of data, move at the speed of the tech. But that's what the technology has been so focused on. And it's like pulled us gravitationally into always thinking around those systems and optimizing them versus this other thing of like, the thinking slow, the sort of like synthesizing what this stuff means. Yeah, as you say, like even the ability to set something aside, walk around the block, come back to it, look at it with fresh eyes. When we do this, we actually really do appreciate it. It's very intuitive. Like mine was like, oh yeah, actually that does tend to work better for me. But boy, in the day-to-day pace and cadence at which marketing seems to run right now, man, it's just so easy for that to get optimized out of the system.
Absolutely. And there's obviously a human cost to it as well, right? That can come in the form of, burnout or decision fatigue, right? Just that having to keep up with that pace. But I wanted you to share maybe some of your personal experiences with this. And are there things that you will intentionally slow down for, right? Like as you like think about this personally for you, right? And also then put yourself in the shoes of marketing leaders, chief marketing officers. Are there things where we should be more intentional about slowing down our pace?
Yeah, so my role now is essentially as a full-time analyst in the MarTech space. The role of analyst is an interesting thing. It's like, both on one hand, wanting to be able to have that time to reflect and analyze and synthesize things. But there's also just the commercial reality of, okay, well, are you engaged in the conversation? LinkedIn is a wonderful example of, a treadmill for these things. And so it's like a perfect example of something where every day on LinkedIn, certainly in marketing and MarTech, hundreds of conversations spurring up and what's this latest thing, and people are seeing this trend. It can be very tempting to want to just sort of like, oh, well, I should jump in on this, I should weigh in on this, but all that takes energy, all that takes, mental capacity, and you can easily fill your entire day and then an entire week of those days and an entire month of those weeks, just sort of like cycling to almost the immediate response. But at the end of the day, that's not actually where a lot of value gets created. At least from an analyst perspective, the only way I really create value is the degree to which I am able to like step back and sort of see like, okay, there's a larger pattern here. There's a whole bunch of noise. Can we sort of like, pull out the signal from the noise? And that's a process that does not lend itself to like, oh, I just look at it and instantly the answers appear out of the heaven. It's one of these things where like, all right, you look at a pattern, you sort of come up with a hypothesis, you start to see a few things. All right, no, that hypothesis doesn't seem to, you just sort of have to iterate through that. And I suspect, having spent time with many marketers, this isn't entirely dissimilar to, when people are thinking about, their campaigns and their strategic evolution. There can be this urgency to want to like, respond to the moment, on some particular trend, or there's a competitive move, or, sales team is like, okay, we need something like right now that,
Yes.
But if you don't actually set aside this time to really think through like, okay, what are we trying to consistently represent into the market, about our business? How are we creating a brand, that people can recognize as a consistency? It has an authenticity to it. And that's the sort of stuff that, you just can't do it in a snap. You have to be able, to invest time in that.
Yeah, there's a word that comes to mind as you're saying all of this, and it is discipline, right? I mean, it has been for a forever reality. It feels like that marketing will get I'm going to use the word interrupted by things that weren't planned, right? Whether it is a sales team request, whether it is a major initiative, new something that happened in the marketplace, a reaction to a competitive announcement, right? Like that's forever been a thing. And yes, it's been accelerated by marketing technology. But what you're talking about is the discipline as a marketing team, as a marketing leader, to know what are those core things that we are going to consistently deliver against, right?
Yeah.
Like we've told the organization, these are the 3 things or the 4 things that everything we do is going to ladder back to. And yes, we are going to need to respond to those real-time things, but not losing focus still on that consistency and that ability to come back to, we told the organization we were going to deliver against these things, right? And being able to maintain that discipline as these requests are coming in.
Yeah, no, I love that way of framing it. There was a movement a number of years back. It sort of has fallen out of favor about this concept of agile marketing, which was essentially taking, this agile software development process, that the super short version of it is like, we organize a set priorities. We then, for a limited window of time, a sprint, a few weeks, we go through, we iterate. At the end of that, we evaluate what was done. We then make decisions, priorities for what we do in the next sprint. And one of the things I always really appreciated about adapting that to marketing is the fact that, yes, okay, things change in marketing, both from a, internal perspective, but frankly, even just externally, you put things out in market, you learn and, your audience and your customers change and then more. And so you need some sort of mechanism to be able to adapt. But it makes a really big difference between you say okay, the way we adapt is on any given day, people just throw stuff at us and we'll fix that, versus saying okay, we've got a process where absent anything that is truly on fire, put this in a backlog. We're in the middle of a 1 or 2 week sprint to focus on actually delivering something that we promised we were going to deliver. At the end of that sprint cycle, we're happy to look at the priorities and rejigger what do we do for this next sprint cycle. But it creates some sort of cadence that just says okay, not everything is change the priority in any given hour. It's more of we can adapt the priorities over a week by week or, a couple week basis. But that there's some discipline to saying listen, we actually need to carve out space to be able to execute whatever the last priority was and be able to deliver it well.
Yeah, I mean, structure, cadence, those are, I think, really important frames here, because I think what marketing leaders need to do is create these healthy sort of operating rhythms for their teams and their organizations that protect strategic thinking, that protect creativity, but also honor, to your point, the things we said we were going to deliver. We need the time and the space to be able to go do that. And just like anything else in life and in business, it is, priority comes in against other priorities. What are we going to do? Sure. Fires happen and we need to adapt and be agile against that. But also managing the expectations of the organization too, as these things are happening. So anyway, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about, this concept of creating healthy operating rhythms for the team and actually letting people know what that looks like, what that process is going to look like. You have a new request against, that are going to potentially upset the initiatives or the priorities we're working on right now. We're going to have a process for how we work through that, right? And this is what the cadence of that is going to look like.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. I mean, the whole thing for me about agile marketing is it didn't really matter to me exactly what the specific process was or what the specific cadence was. Those are all sort of details that from one organization to another, you might have what works best for you. But having some sort of process, some sort of structure, and that it has at least these sort of 2 different modes of, there's the mode of prioritizing things, and then there's the mode of actually focused execution and delivery on those things. And if you let the 2 of those things just, blend into, primordial soup, on a day by day basis, it's just really hard to get stuff done. And Man, there's just, I mean, I feel so much for marketers. I'm not a marketer myself. I'm but I love marketers, and one of the reasons why is, I mean, they're just, such creative, optimistic, like as a categorically, like, marketers in so many ways to me, like really do drive, the heart, of like a customer driven business. But boy, what we've been asking of marketers, I mean, just take it from the technology perspective. I mean, my full-time role here is trying to just keep track of changes in the technology landscape, and I can't do it. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I do this 24/7, and I can barely keep up. For marketers who actually have a real job and things they have to deliver, but at the same time, they're having to develop some sort of way of like, okay, how do I just keep aware of how things are changing, and how do I adapt it, and what do I adapt? It's just it's almost hard for me to imagine any other profession in business that has been asked to sort of expand its scope of responsibilities and the volume of things it's being asked to learn and how to evolve its discipline. Sales certainly hasn't changed that fast. Finance hasn't changed that fast. Even software development, the tools and the technology have advanced a lot, but sort of the structure and the scope of what people are doing, it's been pretty consistent. Marketing, oh my goodness, like the surface area, it just continues to grow.
Yeah, I know. I love that you said that, because people might want to just go back to this last 30 seconds and just hit it on replay a few times, because I think it's a little bit of a therapy session of like, thank you, Scott, for saying that out loud, because we certainly all feel it. And I think another thing that comes up for me in this whole conversation is that we run the risk of confusing activity with progress, or rewarding responsiveness more than effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying responsiveness isn't important, but at what point does speed start to override quality or the strategic lens on something, right? And that is the balance that we're all trying to strike right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many of the stakeholders around marketing are, like when they're coming to marketing, the asks are very like, it's urgent, it's immediate, it's all this. The one stakeholder who is on the opposite end of the spectrum very often is the CFO and the finance team, because actually they're like, listen, we actually really don't care what you're doing. All we ultimately care about is this actually delivering impact, and effectiveness and results, and again, this just becomes one more challenge for, marketers, is they spend so much of their time dealing with these stakeholders who actually aren't looking at it through the lens of the long-term effectiveness. They're looking through I want to scratch this itch right now immediately, and then at the end of the quarter, they have to go and talk to the CFO. It's like, okay, well, talk to me about, the effectiveness, like, well, I would have liked to, but these were the 5 billion other things we got scattered on. It's hard. And so I almost sometimes wonder the degree to which the CFO is actually much more of an ally, the CMO, in like, creating this sort of discipline of like, how do we make sure we're staying focused on delivering the impact to the business, and that the CFO will actually like back that up.
Great. That's such a great point. Yeah, I love that. And perhaps the more of those conversations need to be happening in building that bridge and that allyship, if you will, between marketing and finance department. You're talking about, you are as an analyst watching everything, and this is a full-time job for you, and this is even difficult for you to keep up with. And you could just, quote unquote, singularly focus on that. I'm wondering, I'm going to ask a little bit of a rhetorical question. I think I know the answer to this, but then there's another question behind it, which is, is there any chance marketing slows back down? But the question behind that is, are you seeing anything in the development of marketing technology that will potentially assist with adjusting the pace, right? Or, is there a point at which these tools can help facilitate the ability to focus on the strategic, like automate the responsiveness factor. And I'm not I just want to say I'm not pro automation on everything. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting, is there a pipeline where you see that the technology that has been accelerating this pace comes back around in our favor?
Well, I think that's where a lot of the hope is with AI. This first generation of AI has actually, to your earlier point, boy, talk about over-indexing on activity over, effectiveness. It's just been this like, use AI, and, maybe to some degree that is the right thing to do because it forced everyone to try and like just sort of dive in and start to understand this stuff. But that's not a sustainable, business model. And I think people are, I feel like the AI fever is starting to break a bit and people are like, okay, what's the actual impact? Where can we be applying this that, really makes a difference? And I think the hope for folks is that, okay, there is a lot of these things that were very time consuming work for marketers. Like, okay, how do I gather this right data? How do I analyze it? If I want to do like some sort of competitive analysis, a bunch of stuff that we just had to do very manually, very time consuming. And the AI is actually pretty good at and keeps getting better. I think the important thing here is like, okay, if you have AI that's helping to give you back a chunk of time, then like how defensible that chunk of time you've just gotten back is to invest in more of that sort of strategic thinking, strategic leadership of marketing, rather than like immediately turning around and like, okay, well, now that I could do this competitive analysis in, like 30 minutes instead of 3 days, why don't I do 10 more competitive analyses?
Right.
It's like,
I feel that. I feel that. And I think you're right that I think we're starting to hopefully pull back and correct from this, sort of explosion in use of AI and we learned a lot and I think maybe we're recalibrating, but that's such a great point. Right? Have we reached the point of no return from a pace standpoint where, the time that I got back, am I going to use that for a slow down strategic, right, exercise, initiative, or creative versus doing 5 more of the really speedy competitive analysis that I just did? I mean, that's such a great point.
I mean, it's interesting because my background was as a technologist, and sort of my whole career has basically been sort of applying technology and technology thinking in marketing. And one of the things that even led me to that whole agile marketing movement was I feel there's actually a lot of parallels between software developers and marketers. A lot of the dynamics that software developers went through with their acceleration of things. And so in some ways, I almost see them as like canaries in the coal mine of things that, marketers can both learn some of the dangers from, but also possibly see like, oh, well, maybe there's a path out of this. And like, for example, here with software development, the past year and a half in particular has had this huge explosion with AI coding of people have been able to accelerate software development, by literally like 5x, 10x. It's crazy. So they're like now shipping, all these new products and features and capabilities. And everyone's super excited about that. But it's not been going on long enough that people are like, well, wait a second. Is all this stuff we're shipping, is it actually making a difference? Is it like improving the business? Are we growing customers? Are we making them happier? And actually, in many cases, they're finding out, like, for instance, product companies who are doing this, all they've done is basically by exploding the number of things that they ship, made it completely impossible for any of their salespeople, their customer service or success people or their customers to even be able to explain what the product does or how it does it or what's not. It actually ends up like harming them. And so you're starting to see in the software development side a bit of reflection of like, okay, well, maybe measuring our success by just the volume of things we're shipping, maybe this is not the right framing for it, and so I'm sort of hopeful as that lesson, filtrates through that world, that there are parallels to this marketing thing of just, being able to do more marketing activities with AI is not necessarily the way to actually increase marketing impact. In fact, it might actually be exactly the opposite. It's taking time away from the things that really create impact.
Yeah, no, it's such a great point. More is not necessarily better. Uh, as an analyst, of course, you often do predictive thinking and predictive pieces and with the crystal ball in front of you, Scott, 5 years from now, what will separate great marketing organizations from the average ones?
All right, I will disclaim trying to predict what the next 5 years is going to look like in today's world.
Maybe we make it two, Scott.
Well,
we can make
whatever
it
it
two.
is, I think
Whatever
I
it
would just
is.
frame it
I
and say,
know.
I will give you my best guess,
Yes.
but I stop short
It's,
of claiming it's a prediction.
Totally realize this is like an impossible question.
But I gotta say, it's, to me, I look at it as, in many ways, like business and marketing is ultimately driven by scarcity. It's like, okay, when you have abundance in one area, something else becomes scarce. It's just sort of these like trade-offs. And I think, in where we're headed in an AI world, some of the things that are becoming scarcer is attention, trust, like people's ability to trust in what they are, the value we are increasingly placing, on human relationships is actually having quite a good renaissance, on this. And so my suspicion is, while I do think AI is going to continue to advance, we're going to see it, applied and deployed in, more and more, use cases. I actually think, we will see as a counterweight to that, just, the value of like trust and human relationship and human attention. That's going to be the scarce thing that we're going to value even more. And I think great marketing, great brands are really going to be able to lean into that as, what they're strategically trying to focus on.
I totally agree with you on this one. We talk a lot about trust on the podcast, and Edelman has dug into this with their trust barometer, if you will, and it has been steadily declining the past few years, across industries, and that is the thing that is very scarce right now, and is something that brands need to be putting a lot of attention to. Also agree with you on the importance of human relationships. I think we're even seeing that now with in-person events are becoming sort of the in it thing again, and not just large group, but like sort of small, intimate gatherings of people to share knowledge and ideas and thinking. So I love that. I think you're spot on with that. I think we're going to see it sooner than later, and hopefully just gets richer on all of these things, right? Hopefully that trust barometer starts going back up again, and that, we as marketing leaders and brand leaders can see some success in changing that. Another question for you is we kind of got into this a little bit, but where should healthcare organizations in particular embrace velocity, and where should they resist it?
It's interesting. So I would say I'm not a domain expert, in the healthcare space in particular. So consider this from a layman's perspective, view on that. But, two things about healthcare that I think are really interesting for AI. One, just the volume of information out there and the degree to which that information, changes and updates. That feels like a phenomenal opportunity for AI. Because, certainly human-wise, and the human ways we've tried to maintain, and track all this stuff. It's just, there's too much. And so AI is very good at that. I think the other thing that I'm very intrigued by is the other thing AI is really good at is it is about connecting dots across, data sets that are, again, just hard for us as humans at scale to see. And because health is one of those things that is, so it seems to me so interdependent, on different things, I think of, applying AI in helping deliver, better engagement and better outcomes for people is very promising. And that's not opposed to the trust dimension and the, human connection component of that being invested in equally in parallel. Like they feel like they can complement each other in that context.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree with you on that. I think it's important too to talk about leadership expectations, right? Because the expectation for pace, for speed, often comes from the top, right? And I will ask this question broadly, and your answer could be about speed or it could be about something else. If you could change one expectation that executives have of marketing today, what would it be?
That's a great question. Well, I mean, to me, I think the focus is on outcome, and in particular, making sure that you're looking at that through a balanced scorecard perspective of how the customer, how the client, how the audience, viewed that outcome. The easiest thing for us to get is, things like sales data, retention data, engagement data. And those are good things for us to focus on, from an outcome metric perspective. But to me, like some of the best organizations, they're really finding ways to like factor in like, okay, and how did the customer actually feel about that? How did the client actually feel about that? Through the customer client's metric of what matters to them, are we delivering? And I feel like that is where the expectations need to be focused on. I mean, so many companies, like they talk at a very high level about being customer centric, which is a very nice and noble sentiment, but if you don't put the incentive structures in place, if this isn't the way in which you're actually holding people accountable, on things that align to that, then it becomes, something that ends up nice in the mission statement, but like the actual day-to-day operation and cadence is, a slave to entirely different numbers.
That I love that. That's such a great point. And are we investing? Are we prioritizing investments in not only measuring that we're living up to their expectations, but that we know what they are to begin with, right? Like that, right? So it's a metric thing and it's a front end insights and, are all of the things that we are building as a customer centric organization actually, informed by the voice of that customer? Have we invested to be sure that we know what those insights are?
Yeah. And I'll just volunteer this, I'm a MarTech analyst. My entire world has been focused on marketing technology. I will absolutely say definitively, it is never the answer. The technology is the easiest and smallest piece, of this equation. And history is just littered with example after example of people buying these very sophisticated marketing technology tools and then just failing miserably because it was never about the technology. It was about, the process, the strategy, the way in which the culture of the organization, is working. And so, even though I'm a MarTech analyst, I'm like, spend much less time thinking about the tech.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. And you heard it here, folks. Scott's trying to put himself out of a job. So, take his advice.
My job very small. Yeah. It's a small part of the equation. Yeah.
No, and to the earlier point too, when we started this conversation, I heard it here, folks. Scott said it's his fault that the pace of marketing is accelerating so quickly. So if you have hate mail, make sure you address it to attention.
Yes, consider Scott me the avatar for the entire MarTech industry.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, Scott, I think that's a great place to end the conversation today. So many great insights. Really appreciate your perspective on this. What's the best place for people to get in touch with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation. My website and newsletter is at chiefmartech.com. That's Chief MarTech without the H at the end. Brilliant or terrible branding decision, you decide. And of course, I'm also on LinkedIn.
Yeah, check him out on LinkedIn. Lots of great content there. Thanks again, Scott.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
And thanks for joining us on the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. We'll see you next time.